Hey guys, it's Gibbons here, and I'm back with another KeyShot 6 tutorial. Today I want to keep things nice and short. The idea is to create an introduction to KeyShot 6 for beginners. I'd like to keep the whole thing under 20 minutes if possible. We are going to assume you've never touched KeyShot before, and I will walk you through importing geometry, setting up your scene, your environment, applying materials, and doing a final rendering. Without further ado, let's hop into KeyShot. The first thing we're going to do is import our geometry. I'm importing a step file I created using SolidWorks. We're going to leave our import settings at the default settings and just click import. On the left-hand side, we have our project panel. On the right-hand side, we have our library panel. At the top, we have a ribbon of different features, options, functions. The same thing on the bottom. Today we're going to ignore what's on top, we're going to ignore what's on bottom, and we're going to work in the project and the library panels. You notice each one of these panels is made up of different tabs, and by selecting those tabs, you can see the different options that you have within those. When you have the Scene tab selected in the project panel, you can see the scene tree, which kind of represents all of the objects that you have in your KeyShot scene. By clicking the plus sign here, we can expand our model, and each one of these items represents a separate body within our geometry. Now I'm going to select the first 3 items here, and I'm going to right-click and delete those because I know I actually do not want those included in this model. So the next thing you should understand is how to move, so to speak, your camera and your geometry within KeyShot. You move your camera by using the left mouse button, the scroll wheel, and clicking the scroll wheel. To move your camera around your object, or to orbit the camera, you left click and drag, and that's going to move your camera in a 360-degree arc around your geometry and around the scene. Next, if we want to pan around, meaning not move the camera around our object and not move the camera closer or further from the object, but simply move the camera left to right, up and down. Think of this as an XY axis here. We do this by clicking the scroll wheel, holding it down, and then moving your mouse. And finally, if we want to move the camera closer or further away from our geometry, we simply scroll with the mouse wheel. Next, if we want to move our actual geometry, we are going to do that using the Move tool. If I select a piece of geometry by left-clicking on it, it becomes outlined in orange. If I move to the Position tab underneath the Scene tree in our project panel, and I click the Move tool, we get an X, Y, and Z axis move tool represented by different colored arrows. Along each of those axes is an ellipse that allows you to rotate the object, and you also have a box, a cube in the center, which allows you to scale the object. At the end of each arrow, we have a smaller box, and that allows you to scale along that axis. So if I want to move, I just click on an arrow and I drag my object. If I want to scale it, I can scale it globally, or I can scale it in just one axis. I can also rotate it, and I can also, at the bottom here, use this little panel that gives us options to either snap to ground or snap to a lower object. You can snap to a pivot, and there's a few other nice little tools in here. If you notice, my Move tool is now aligned with the Y-axis of this object. I can click the Global button, and that will reset my Move tool to the global XYZ, not the XYZ of the object I'm moving. I'm going to hit X to cancel out of this, and now you know how to move the camera and how to move the geometry. The first thing I like to do when importing geometry is I like to apply a backplate. A backplate is simply a background image. It does not affect lighting or anything else like that. For the sake of this tutorial, we are going to go into the Downloads folder, and I'm going to select a backplate that I like to use. It's just a gray, solid vignette background. You can download the same background from the KeyShot Cloud Library. If you move to the bottom left of your screen and click Cloud Library, it will open up your browser, and you could then access everything from environments to textures, backplates, and materials, all for free. This is a great way to add to your KeyShot library. After applying a backplate, I would like to take our boring startup HDRI and change it to a more dynamic one. If we move to our project panel on the Environments tab, you can see our startup HDR is a mostly white studio HDR environment. I'm going to move over to the Environments tab in our library panel, scroll down, and select from the Dosh Studio 2K and apply that. What you'll notice is that this is a much higher contrast HDRI, and there's some nice reflections and some strong light sources. This allows us to better share the details of our model. Now that we have our model lit and we have a backplate, I would like to apply some materials. In this case, I want to keep things simple, and I'm thinking kind of a stormtrooper-like aesthetic. So I'm going to move over to the Materials tab in our Libraries panel, and rather than browsing all the materials, I find it faster to just type what I want. In this case, we're going for white paint. I'm going to drag the white gloss paint onto my object. All the surfaces that I would like to be glossy white are getting the paint. I also want to apply a glass material, so I'm going to again double click up in my search bar, and I'm going to type in glass, and I'm going to use a basic gray glass. Something to note if you are using transparent materials in KeyShot. When you have two surfaces of geometry in KeyShot that are touching, and one of them is transparent or has transparency and another one does not, you will get some unpleasant artifacting that looks like weird zebra stripes or something like this. There's an easy way to change that. Let's move to our project panel and select Scene, click on the piece of geometry that is transparent, and now we are going to change the scale of it just a tiny amount in order to ensure that it's not actually touching or intersecting the geometry that is not transparent. To do this, while our geometry is selected, we're going to go to the Position tab, and we're going to scale this to 1.01. And now we avoid that strange artifacting, and this is technically a correct model. Now that we've applied our basic materials, we should set up a render camera. Select the Camera tab in the Project panel, and we have just one camera, and it's called our free camera. I'm going to create a new camera. I'm going to call this one Render 1. And you have an option to lock cameras in order to make sure that you don't lose the settings or change the angle. Since I don't have this set up quite yet, I'm going to move my model into position, and for a slightly more interesting composition, I will move it off to the side a bit. And I think a good 3/4 view allows us to read the form of this model and show off a couple different materials. You can further change the camera settings if you'd like, but for now we will leave them set to the default, and we will lock our render camera. But before we do that, we're going to click the little Save Current Camera icon here. Notice the unsaved went away, and now we can lock that camera. Now we can continue to change everything but the camera after a camera has been locked. So one thing I would like to do is edit the material that I've applied. By double clicking a material, it automatically activates the material tab and we can change its settings. Instead of a 100% perfectly glossy finish, I'm going to go for a more realistic finish and add a 0.01 value here to soften some of the harsh reflections just a little bit. Now I would like to apply the same material to all the other white areas. So I'm going to hold Shift and left click and then hold Shift and right click on the other areas, and now I've basically applied the same slightly rough glossy white paint to all the other areas. Next, we're going to adjust the lighting settings and get ready to make our final render. Let's select the lighting tab in the projects panel, and you'll notice that we're in basic mode. This is by default, and this allows your computer to run KeyShot nice and smooth while you are applying materials and environment settings and changing things to ensure a fast, responsive workflow. We now want to focus on increasing image quality. So what we're going to do is turn on global illumination, ground illumination, and caustics I would like to turn on since we do have some transparent materials here. Now caustics will definitely slow things down quite a bit, and interior mode is an option you can turn on in order to speed things up a little bit. Now our ray bounces is set to 6, indirect at 0, and shadow quality at 1. I would like to increase these a little bit before producing a final rendering. We will change ray bounces to 12, indirect bounces to 10, and leave shadow quality at 1 for now. You can see in my heads-up display here on the left, the number of samples is constantly going up the longer no settings are being changed. So if you let this sit for, say a half hour and come back, those samples will be pretty high and your image quality will have increased a lot. You can, in some cases, get a nice enough rendering without actually initiating a full-on rendering. I'm noticing that our white highlight area is a little blown out in my opinion, and before creating a final rendering, I think we should address that. So by double-clicking our white material, I bring up the material tab, and if we look at our color, it's 100% white, which is, generally speaking, you want to avoid absolute whites and absolute blacks. I'm going to change this from 100% white to 90 and see how that looks. Now that we're ready to create a rendering, we're going to select Render. And inside the Render dialog box, we have a few options. For today's tutorial, we're going to keep our format at JPEG. If you require a different file extension, you can select it from here. We're going to change our resolution to 1500. And we're going to leave our DPI at 72. Next, we'll select the options on the left, and we get to choose how we are going to achieve our quality, whether that's through maximum samples, maximum time, or advanced control. In my case, I'd like to use a maximum time because it allows me to understand how long this is actually going to take my computer to render. In my case, I'm going to give this not 1 minute, I'm going to give it 1 hour, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. We're going to click Render. And at this point, while you have maximum time rendering, you can keep an eye on this. And if at any point it looks good enough and you would like to stop it before it's technically done, you can see its progress in the bottom right-hand corner. You can actually just click the Save button and then close your rendering.
1 hour later.
At this point, I'm just going to leave this as is. We're going to close the dialog box. Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you found it at all helpful, please make sure you subscribe. That way, when I publish something new, you get a little notification about it. And if this video was helpful, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. If you would like to see any more of my work, visit me at willgibbonsdesign.com. You can get in touch with me there. If you have questions or requests for any other videos, make sure you comment below on this video, and I will try to address those.